I was back in that fancy boardroom, the place where they had called me a paranoid lunatic exactly 1 year ago. They laughed when I tried to warn them that the company's biggest partner was draining their millions. Now the laughter was gone. All I saw was pure, cold dread on their faces because I hadn't just brought some paper trail. I had brought the receipt for their entire corporate disaster. This was the moment of my payback, and all I had to do was stand there and watch them crumble. My name is Alex, and for 8 years I lived and breathed Apex Solutions. We were a $50 million tech firm. I was the chief operator, the guy who made everything run. Robert, the CFO, was my friend, my partner in crime, until he became the actual criminal. We were a success story, and I trusted him with everything. That trust, it turns out, was worth millions to him. If you love hearing stories about deep betrayal and the kind of patient revenge that actually wins, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss the genius plan I cooked up over 12 long months. The moment everything shattered wasn't dramatic. It was a single tiny line on a money report late one night. I was checking the quarterly numbers and saw a repeated payment, small enough to ignore, labeled Consulting Fee Project Z. There was no Project Z. I knew our whole system like the back of my hand. This wasn't a mistake, it was a ghost. My blood went cold. I asked Robert about it the next morning, trying to sound casual. Hey, Rob, what's up with this Project Z payment? He just shrugged, not even glancing at me. Old tax trick, Alex. Relax. It's saving us money. Stop worrying. His easy smile and total lack of concern were worse than any confession. He was lying, and he knew I knew something was wrong. That's when my hunt began. I spent weeks digging deep into the digital shadows of the company system. What I found wasn't a mistake. It was a masterpiece of theft. Robert was funneling millions into fake companies he'd set up in 3 different states. He was using dozens of small, boring transactions, things like IT maintenance or office supplies, to move money from our accounts to his. He relied on the fact that he was the CFO, the man everyone trusted, to make his dirty work look like standard, boring business. It made me physically ill to realize I had been building a dream alongside a snake. When I finally took my findings to the founder, Mr. Henderson, I was emotional. My evidence was strong, but it was complex and incomplete. Robert walked in, smooth as silk. He didn't deny the transfers, he just claimed I was misinterpreting brilliant, aggressive tax strategies. Then he delivered the kill shot. He looked Henderson right in the eye and said, Alex is seeing things. H, he's under stress, paranoid, unstable. The board chose the man who promised more profits over the man who brought uncomfortable truths. They kicked me out. I walked, away humiliated, betrayed, and branded as a crazy liability. But they made one massive mistake. They left me alive, and they left my digital fingerprints all over their system. The moment the elevator doors closed behind me, I wasn't just unemployed, I was exiled. Being fired is one thing, but being publicly branded as unstable by your best friend is a special kind of poison. I was untouchable. Every recruiter who called suddenly had nothing to offer when they ran my background and heard the whispers. My savings evaporated trying to cover expenses I couldn't cut fast enough. I went from chief operator of a multi-million-dollar company to watching my bank account dwindle, all because one man's greed was covered by his polished lies. The first few months were a dark blur of rage and despair. I wanted to storm back in, shout the truth, and physically tear down Robert's empire. But that would have proven them right, that I was the unstable one. That's when the shift happened. The white-hot rage cooled into something sharper, something far more dangerous. Pure clinical calculation. I realized revenge wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a carefully constructed surgical strike. I made a vow. I wasn't going to just expose Robert. I was going to become the person who was absolutely, legally, undeniably right. I turned my tiny apartment into my war room. I didn't waste time watching movies or playing games. I spent every waking hour in a self-imposed, brutal education. I wasn't just learning, I was building a weapon out of my brain. I dove into forensic accounting, not the broad strokes, but the fine print. The exact legal language needed to trace international shell company transfers, the specific metadata stamps that auditors rely on. I taught myself advanced SQL to query databases like a professional hacker. My laptop was running constantly, a quiet hum that was the soundtrack to my transformation. I was turning my deep knowledge of how the company worked into the ultimate weakness of how Robert cheated. I was taking my paranoia and forging it into a PhD in financial destruction. The real key, however, lay in that one last brilliant move I'd made the day they kicked me out. During my last hour on the clock, under the guise of packing, I installed a tiny custom-built administrative script into a seldom-used section of the company's archival server. It wasn't malware, it was a simple, legitimate-looking report generator that allowed a single specific external IP address, mine, to periodically check the status of certain long-term contracts. It was small, stealthy, and completely invisible unless you knew the exact string of code. I called it my digital anchor. This anchor would be my lifeline to Robert's continued crimes, a tiny digital key I could use from the outside world without ever needing to step foot inside Apex Solutions again. This wasn't about getting my job back. This was about proving I wasn't crazy, that I was the only one who saw the truth. Robert had everything, the money, the power, the respect. I had nothing but time, skill, and the silent hum of my computer. The hunter was ready, and the prey had no idea he was being tracked. The next phase required me to move from the shadows and actually start gathering the legal receipts. My digital anchor was working, quietly and efficiently, like a tiny fishing line dropped into the deep ocean of Apex's servers. Every week it would feed me small, sanitized snippets of data. Not enough to be traced, but enough to confirm Robert's scheme was accelerating. The stress of the previous year had only made him bolder, more careless. He had moved from hundreds of thousands to multi-million-dollar transfers, hiding them under the names of legitimate but long-forgotten vendors. My technical education was paying off, allowing me to translate his criminal language into pure, damning facts. But I had a problem. Paper trails only get you so far. To make a case stick in court, I needed a witness, an insider, or at least a bridge to the human element. The thought of contacting anyone from Apex made my stomach turn, but this wasn't about friendship. It was about necessary leverage. I thought about the team. Only one person had the right mix of technical access and deep, simmering resentment. Sarah. She was a mid-level analyst in the accounting department, the kind of person who loved spreadsheets more than people. She had always quietly complained that Robert ignored her warnings about budget anomalies, favoring yes men over competence. I knew she felt invisible, and invisibility can breed powerful bitterness. Reaching out to her required a carefully crafted strategy. I couldn't just call. That would be too risky for both of us. Instead, I started using LinkedIn, but not to connect. I anonymously published a series of highly technical, industry-specific articles about advanced digital auditing flaws in legacy systems. These were dense, boring white papers designed for one reader. Ask Sarah. They contained hyper-specific, coded examples that mirrored Robert's exact techniques, but disguised as general theory. It worked. After the third article, I saw her name pop up. She hadn't commented, but she had viewed all 3 articles multiple times and shared one with a private note only I could decipher. She was hooked. She knew I was sending a coded message. I know what Robert is doing, and I know you see it too. The next step was risky. I arranged a meeting through a burner email account at a generic, overcrowded coffee shop 20 miles from Apex, neutral territory. When I saw her, she was a wreck. She sat down, clutching a massive latte, looking over her shoulder every 2 seconds. I looked successful, calm, and prepared. I wore a suit. I had a plan. This was no longer the desperate Alex she knew. Sarah, I know you're seeing the numbers, I started, keeping my voice low and steady. I know he's running money through 3 separate shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, disguised as capital improvement expenditures. I didn't ask her if she knew. I told her what I knew. That level of detail was the only proof she needed that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't there to hire her or threaten her. I needed one specific, critical piece of non-digital evidence that only her role could access, something that would legitimize my entire technical investigation. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. I can't steal files, Alex. I have a kid. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I don't need files, Sarah. I need a single, dated, physical document. Something so boring, so minor that Robert himself forgot it existed. But for my case, it's the physical key to unlock his whole digital history. The tension in that coffee shop was unbearable. I knew that if she walked away, my entire year of preparation might collapse. Sarah finally broke. Not immediately, but a week later. She sent a single encrypted email. Meet me at the same place, midnight. It was the kind of move only a nervous first-time collaborator makes. I knew she was terrified, which meant she was serious. I arrived at the coffee shop at 11:50 p.m. The place was deserted, cold, and lit only by the weak streetlights outside. When she appeared, she didn't even sit down. She thrust a thick, folded piece of paper into my hand, her eyes wide with fear. It's the original vendor agreement, she whispered, her voice shaking. Robert's signature, dated 3 years ago, the one for the IT systems audit. It's the single contract he used to justify the initial shell company payments, the ones he started small with. He forgot he signed this one before he changed the vendor name 6 times. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just a paper trail, it was a physical link between Robert, his signature, and the specific digital trail I'd been tracking for a year. It was the key to proving my digital data wasn't fabricated. I thanked her, didn't ask her any more questions, and left immediately. Our collaboration was over. She had done her part. Now the real performance had to begin. My next phase was the hardest, acting. I had to convince Robert and anyone else who cared to look that I was no longer a threat, that I was, in fact, a complete failure. If Robert believed I was broken, he would get sloppy. I started frequenting high-end business lunches, places Robert was guaranteed to visit, but always at tables where I couldn't afford the main course. I wore the same slightly faded suit, sat alone, and made sure I was always drinking weak coffee while looking stressed, pulling my hair out over an ancient, clunky laptop. I wanted him to see me struggling. The first time he spotted me, a wave of cold triumph washed over his face. He walked over, all smiles and expensive cologne. Alex, good to see you, buddy. Heard you're doing some freelance work? Tough break, man. That's how the cookie crumbles. He was gloating, but I forced a look of defeated exhaustion. Hey, Robert, I mumbled, forcing a weak smile. Yeah, just trying to keep the lights on. Turns out setting up your own thing is brutal. Miss the Apex days. I deliberately made myself sound small, desperate, and regretful. I even mentioned a fictional failed investment I had just lost money on, ensuring he heard the word broke. He laughed, a deep, condescending rumble. Yeah, it's a tough world out there when you don't have the infrastructure. But hey, keep grinding. Maybe one day you'll get back to where you were. He didn't pity me. He dismissed me. That was the perfect reaction. He walked away reassured that I was irrelevant, a beaten dog who missed his kennel. This performance art of failure continued for months. Every time he saw me, I was a little more down on my luck, a little more desperate. I let him believe that the unstable man he had framed was now just a pitiable ghost of his former self. But while he was watching my performance on the surface beneath the waves, My digital anchor and Sarah's paper key were combining into a chain link fence around his entire operation. His self assurance was growing exponentially, and that was exactly when people make the biggest, most crucial mistakes. My patience was about to pay off in a spectacular way. My routine was a masterpiece of deception. For months, I played the part of the miserable failure, but every night, the broken down laptop I showed Robert was connected to a powerful external rig that was meticulously assembling his downfall. The physical contract Sarah gave me was the Rosetta Stone. It provided the date, the specific vendor name, and Robert's exact signature from the very beginning of the scheme. Using that contract, I could now filter the raw data from my digital anchor. I wasn't just tracking random transactions anymore, I was building a timeline. I cross-referenced the legitimate contract with every single payment made to Robert's shell companies, detailing how the amounts escalated from small, suspicious transfers to brazen multi-million dollar payouts. The realization hit me one night while staring at the data. Robert wasn't just stealing money. He was strategically starving Apex's most innovative department, the one I used to run, to hide the missing funds. He had cut the budget for R&D, claiming cost overruns, while simultaneously funneling that exact difference into his own pockets. His greed was crippling the company's future. This added a layer of malicious intent that went beyond simple theft. It was corporate sabotage. The final piece of the puzzle wasn't technical, it was strategic. I couldn't just walk into the Apex office. I needed an invitation. I needed to bypass Robert entirely and go straight to the top. The chairman of the board, Mr. Henderson. I knew Henderson was obsessed with corporate image and market value. He wouldn't risk a public scandal, which meant I couldn't use threats. I had to use discretion. I drafted a single anonymous letter, handwritten, professionally delivered to his private residence. The letter didn't contain any accusations. It only contained three things: the exact current deficit in the R&D budget, the specific total amount of funds diverted over the last 12 months, a single cryptic line: the proof is in the original system audit contract, which Mr. Robert has intentionally forgotten to destroy. The letter was a bomb wrapped in silk. It didn't name Robert, but the accuracy of the numbers, especially the R&D deficit, which was confidential, would trigger an immediate internal investigation. I wasn't asking for justice, I was posing an existential threat to his stock value. 2 days later, my burner phone rang. It was an executive assistant, calm and professional. Mr. Henderson would like to meet with you privately, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., at an off-site, neutral location. He was very specific that you bring everything. I hung up, feeling the final, exquisite tension coil in my chest. I had spent a year as a ghost, an analyst, and an actor. Now I was about to become the prosecutor. I had my digital evidence compiled into a flash drive, my physical contract secured in a briefcase, and my mental defense prepared. The trap was set. Tomorrow I would finally walk back into their world, not as the scapegoat, but as the executioner of their financial structure. The meeting wasn't at the Apex headquarters. It was in a sterile, unnamed conference room on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The kind of neutral territory where very important people handle very dirty laundry. I arrived exactly at 6:58 a.m. I was wearing a new, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. My shoes gleamed. The Alex they knew was gone. This was the Alex they should have hired. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken dread. Mr. Henderson, the chairman, sat at the head of the table. To his right, the company's lead attorney, a man known for his cold efficiency. And then there was Robert. He was there, but he wasn't happy. Henderson had clearly forced him to attend. Robert's face was a mask of confusion and barely contained anger. He had no idea I was the one who had dropped the bomb. He just thought I was some random consultant Henderson had hired to audit the budget. Henderson cut straight to the point. "Mr. Alex," he said, his voice like gravel, I received an extremely specific and disturbing communication. You are here to explain what that communication meant. Robert is here because he is the CFO and everything falls under his purview. Robert leaned back, trying to project arrogance, but his eyes were narrowed with suspicion. I don't know why we're wasting time with an outsider, Henderson. My numbers are clean. I ignored Robert, completely focusing only on the chairman. This was a power play. Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, I am not an outsider. I am the former COO who left because I tried to warn the previous management team about this exact financial rot. I paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Robert stiffened, finally recognizing the shift in my posture, the coldness in my eyes. Warning? Alex, you were obsessed with phantom problems. You cracked under pressure, remember? Robert sneered, his voice loud, trying to regain control. I met his gaze, and for the first time in a year, I smiled. A cold, genuine smile of pure anticipation. Robert, I remember everything. And unlike you, I remember the rules of accounting and the cost of corporate loyalty. The attorney quickly intervened, sensing the personal tension. Mr. Alex, we are only interested in facts. You claimed specific, massive fraud. Prove it. I didn't open my briefcase yet. I started with the setup, the psychological blow. I began detailing the scheme not using the names of Robert's shell companies, but using his own internal codes. I walked them through the timeline of the R&D budget cuts, describing the internal memos he wrote, the exact dates he approved them, and the resulting financial gain. This was the information only a deep insider could know. I described how he'd cut the funds for Project Phoenix, a project I had personally championed, and how 2 days later, an identical amount appeared in an offshore account disguised as a software licensing fee. Robert's face began to lose color. His breathing became shallow. He wasn't just facing an audit. He was facing his own memory. He was hearing his entire criminal history recited back to him by the one person he thought he had completely destroyed. The tension was suffocating. I knew he was about to break and try to escape, but I wasn't done setting the stage. Not yet. Robert was squirming. He tried the classic maneuver of a cornered executive. Attack the source. Henderson, this is absurd. He's just throwing out codes and dates. He's been out of the loop for a year. He's trying to discredit me because he failed here. His voice cracked, the sound of desperation finally creeping in. Is that so, Robert? I asked calmly, opening my briefcase and pulling out the stack of neatly organized documents. All copies, of course. Let's talk about a specific project code, Apollo Legacy 2023. A small contract, only $150,000, marked as hardware maintenance. That money, Robert, went to a vendor called RFT Dynamics. I slid a single piece of paper across the table to Mr. Henderson and the attorney. It was a printout of the internal ledger. The attorney's eyes scanned the page quickly, then widened slightly. Mr. Alex, this is an internal accounting document. How do you have this? The attorney demanded, his tone shifting from skeptical to genuinely concerned. It's amazing what information people leave behind when they assume a digital cleanup is complete, I replied, allowing them to believe I simply recovered it from an old hard drive. I didn't mention the year of digital architecture study. I looked directly at Robert, who was now leaning forward, his hands clenched. Robert, you approved this payment personally on October 14th. You noted in the internal memo, which I also have a copy of, that this hardware was critical for our Q4 stability. But there's a small problem. RFT Dynamics isn't a hardware maintenance firm. It's a single-person consulting firm based in the Cayman Islands, specializing in, shall we say, asset sheltering. Robert finally launched his direct defense, standing up sharply. It's a reputable firm. They subcontract. This is circumstantial, Alex. You have no proof they didn't do the work. He was sweating, but he was still fighting. banking on the idea that my evidence was fragmented. You're right, Robert. I don't have proof they didn't do the work, I conceded, letting the tension drop for a split second. The attorney looked at me, perplexed. But I do have proof of who owns RFT Dynamics. I reached into the briefcase again, pulling out a small printed sheet, a corporate registry extract. I didn't push it forward yet. I held it up so Robert could see the header. The color drained from his face completely. Mr. Henderson, what you're looking at is the public registration for RFT Dynamics. The beneficial owner, the signatory on all their bank accounts, is Robert's distant cousin, a man who until 2 years ago was a plumber in New Jersey. Plumbers generally don't handle $150,000 software contracts for a multi-million-dollar tech firm. This was the first undeniable link, moving from abstract numbers to a concrete, traceable person connected to Robert. But it wasn't the final kill shot. I needed him to panic and overplay his hand. Robert's professional facade shattered. He lunged across the table toward the registry document, trying to snatch it. The attorney and Henderson moved instantly, blocking him. "Robert, sit down!" Henderson roared. Robert paused, his dignity destroyed. He backed away, breathing heavily, eyes darting around the room, desperately seeking an exit or a way to spin this. He settled on one last bluff, trying to call my entire hand. "Fine, I know my cousin owns a business. It was a poor ethical choice, but it's not fraud. You still haven't shown a single shred of evidence that I profited directly. All of this is noise." He had just given me the perfect opening. I looked at Henderson, then back at the trembling CFO. "You want direct proof, Robert? You want the receipt? Then let's talk about the final, most egregious theft. The one you thought you protected by getting rid of me." The room went silent, bracing for the hammer to fall in the next final move. I watched the color drain from Robert's face. The revelation about his cousin and the fake company, Project Z, hit him harder than a punch. It confirmed that I hadn't just guessed, I had done my homework. But even as the tension in the room thickened, Robert's ego refused to break. He forced a twisted smile. "This is circumstantial, Alex. It's a family loan gone sour, perhaps. You have no proof of theft. You have no legal receipt." He leaned back, the image of the smug finance guy restored, trying one last time to intimidate the room. "You were fired for being unstable. You can't even get your facts straight." "I moved that money, yes. I moved it to cover my tracks after you left, precisely because you were running around yelling conspiracy theories. The original money is still safe." Miss Davies, the chairwoman, looked weary. "Alex, he's right. The shell companies are suspicious, but where is the direct proof that the millions vanished from Apex?" This was the opening I needed. Robert had just confirmed his actions after I left. The perfect lie. "You're right, Robert," I said, picking up the small, sleek laptop I had brought. "The original money was safe, but you've been working hard to make sure the company stays profitable while you slowly drain it through inflated contractor fees. You were so busy covering your tracks, you forgot one crucial detail about the systems I built. My termination was just part of your plan, wasn't it? Get rid of the guy who knows too much, then clean up the mess." Robert scoffed. "If you had proof, you'd show it. You're stalling, Alex." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm stalling, Robert? Or am I just waiting for you to tell me exactly how you plan to destroy the audit trail for your latest $3 million transaction?" The sheer shock on his face was confirmation. The final, most aggressive withdrawal he'd made last month, the one I designed my code to track, was now officially confirmed by the criminal himself. He didn't know I knew. He just walked right into the kill zone. The moment Robert confirmed the $3 million withdrawal with a sharp, terrified inhale, the air left the room. "You see, Ms. Davies," I continued, ignoring Robert as he stammered for an excuse. "When I was forced to clean out my desk, I had 1 hour. I couldn't copy contracts or transfer massive files. But I did plant one small piece of code, a digital anchor, inside our proprietary internal communication server. I connected the small silver USB drive to my laptop. The screen in the boardroom, which had been showing boring financial charts, snapped to a simple audio playback interface. That anchor was set to activate and silently record only if two conditions were met. A major, off-cycle financial transfer occurred, and the user attempted to access the specific hidden debug log I created when setting up Project Z. Robert had done both. He had accessed the log last week to make sure he hadn't left any trace. He had just activated his own death warrant. I pressed play. A familiar voice, Robert's voice, clear and cold, filled the silent room. It wasn't just a financial log. It was a confession he'd recorded into his own private server memo after his last major theft. That fool Alex actually thought he was saving them. Now he's gone and the paper trail is clean. 3 million wired today. Easy. It's too late for them to find the old transfers now, and the new ones will look like standard maintenance. They're blind. I'm brilliant. Apex is mine. The room froze. The voice was unmistakable. The details were undeniable. The recording wasn't static. It was a proud, arrogant admission of guilt, time-stamped and filed on a company server by the thief himself. Robert didn't scream or deny it. He just slumped, his face gray, the last flicker of arrogance extinguished. The man was broken. He simply whispered, his voice thick with defeat. You recorded me." "No, Robert," I replied, closing the laptop and pulling out the USB drive. "You recorded yourself. You were so confident, you documented your own crime in your own private server memo. This isn't just an audit trail, it's a signed, sealed confession." "This, Ms. Davies," I said, handing the drive to the astonished chairwoman, "is the receipt." Ms. Davies didn't even look at the other board members. She picked up the desk phone immediately. "Security and legal. We have a situation in the main boardroom, and call the police. We need an escort for Mr. Robert." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than the thick mahogany table we were sitting around. Robert was destroyed. The man who had walked in 10 minutes ago with arrogance and a shark smile was now reduced to a whimpering child, staring at the flashing red light of the tiny USB drive I still held. He finally understood. I hadn't just studied his crime. I had documented his confession. The chairman of the board, a formidable woman named Ms. Davies, didn't waste a second. "Security, get in here now." I didn't watch them drag Robert out. I didn't need to. I felt the collective shift in the room, the fear of the others turning into begrudging respect for me. They had called me crazy, but I had just saved their company from total financial ruin. The cleanup was swift and brutal. The audit team I had hired walked in right behind security, and they spent the next 2 weeks tearing apart Robert's entire network of shell companies and fake consulting fees. My digital anchor provided a clean, undeniable roadmap of every stolen cent. 3 months later, I was back in the boardroom. Not as an employee, but as a consultant. Miss Davies looked at me, her eyes devoid of the skepticism they held a year ago. She handed me a contract. It wasn't a job offer, it was a thank you. The company decided not to pursue criminal charges only if Robert cooperated with the full financial recovery, and as a result, they avoided a PR nightmare. They paid me a 7-figure finder's fee for exposing the fraud and saving the company's reputation. It wasn't just about the money, though that certainly helped. It was about validation. It was about proving to myself and to everyone who doubted me that sometimes the paranoid one is the only one who sees the truth. I used that money and my new reputation as the man who beat a corporate system to start my own consulting firm, specializing in financial security and internal audit. I don't chase paper trails anymore. I build digital traps. My life is good. I'm happy. I'm finally building something that can't be stolen by a snake in a suit. Sometimes justice isn't quick. Sometimes it requires patience, silence, a lot of studying, and perfect preparation. But when you finally deliver that perfect receipt, the victory is sweeter than anything you could have imagined. Call to action and final questions. If this story of corporate espionage and calculated revenge resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into a true story of revenge and redemption. Tell me in the comments below, did I handle my revenge perfectly, or should I have done something more direct? What would you have done in my position when they called you a liar?